Welcome back to The Word. I'm Jackie Ray, and this is part 2 in our coverage of the sentencing of hip-hop artist Tory Lanez. Now, last week we had attorneys Crystal Morgan and Michael Hayden from the nonprofit Unite the People come on the show and talk about what they're looking forward to regarding his appeal. We really didn't talk too much about what's already been litigated and focused more on what they're looking forward to regarding the appeal, be that a resentencing or a new trial altogether. Nonetheless, I found it fascinating the reaction that we had to that podcast. It really heightened my awareness on how much the court of public opinion truly played a part in this case. No one knows that better than my next guest, Meghann Cuniff, who is a legal affairs reporter who covered the entire case, and oftentimes her coverage caused such a visceral reaction in people that she was personally attacked online. She's joining me now to talk about the Tory Lanez case, what she learned from that, and what she anticipates seeing regarding his appeal. That's coming up next on this week's episode of The Word that is brought to you by our local members. I want to once again remind you that we cannot do this without you, and you can become a member for as little as $8 a month. But I want to once again shout out our premier members, and they are Ryan Hardy and Tim Grobady. You heard me right. Tim Grobady, the newly retired Long Beach Post reporter, is a premium member. I cannot tell you how much of an honor it is to know that someone who has been so instrumental and so impactful to this newsroom, who is semi-retired but still knows the importance of local journalism and is now a premium member. You are the GOAT, Tim Grobady. Never forget that, and we appreciate you so much. Don't forget, you can become a loyal member right now as well by going to lbpost.com/join, and for as little as $8 a month, you can be a part of helping us deliver the news that you need. And right now, I give you Meghann Cuniff. So you think the Democratic Party cares about Black people? Believe it or not, Rex, I think that tweet is part of the problem. Do you feel like we could have addressed this homeless issue much sooner? You have to speak a word, make it a good one.
Okay, let's go.
Welcome back to the Word podcast. Once again, I'm Jackie Ray. I'm very excited because Meghann Cuniff is joining me right now. And if you remember last week's episodes, we talked to the appeal attorneys for Tory Lanez, but there's a lot of intricacies with that trial that I think, especially if you're kind of a headline reader, which unfortunately a lot of people are these days, you might have missed some of the details. In my opinion, you might have missed how Tory Lanez didn't do himself any favors in that trial. So we have an expert here, but aside from her expertise regarding that trial, she has kind of an amazing background. So I just wanted to start with that really quickly. So Meghann, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Okay, so let's start with your background, because you kind of went what we would call probably a traditional route as far as your journalism career, working with a outlet and making sure that was a goal, but you've kind of veered off from that. So let's just start at the beginning. When did you know that journalism was your calling?
I wanted to go to into journalism in high school. I worked at the high school paper and had a great experience with that. And it just made sense to go to University of Oregon and work at the paper there, work at the college paper. And I had a great time doing that, covering everything at the University of Oregon and everything with the administration. So it seemed like journalism was the way to go.
And so when you graduated, what was your first job?
So I did an internship through the Snowden internship program at the University of Oregon. It was actually with the Bend Bulletin. And I was there for the summer of 2005, reporting on the business page. Then I actually went back to University of Oregon for a term and was at the college paper with my friends. My friend who I was a reporter with was the editor-in-chief that year. And another friend and I were the news editors that term. So it was a lot of just dedicating ourselves to the Emerald that year. And then the next term, I got an internship with the Spokesman Review covering the Idaho legislature. The Spokesman Review is based in Spokane, but I actually went to Boise, Idaho, and worked with their legislative reporter, Betsy Russell, covering the 2006 Idaho legislative session. And then went up to Coeur d'Alene after that and finished my internship up there, and then got hired on to cover K through 12 schools. And worked at the Spokesman Review for several years, covered schools and then the Dayside public safety beat and cops and courts over in Spokane.
So now you have a career that I think a lot of journalists would love to have, but it's very scary sometimes, and you're completely independent. what took you from working for an entity to, hey, I'm just an independent journalist and doing an amazing job and being everywhere? Your name is so well known, especially when it comes to these high profile trials.
It was wanting to basically give the people what they want, like working for a news agency, an organization, Law and Crime. I got so much out of it. They do so much good work covering cases all over the country, but it was also a workload thing. They have so many cases that they cover that dedicating somebody to one case and only writing maybe a few articles a week about one case just isn't something that's in their repertoire. So if I wanted to continue covering the Tory Lanez case and to really give it the coverage that I thought everyone was looking for, I thought an independent platform would be the way to go. And, I was also just struck by watching all the YouTubers and kind of seeing all the independent people who were covering the Lanez case from other standpoints. I kind of realized that my background in traditional newspapers has kind of siloed me off from a lot of the news, social media, and the opportunities there. So I wanted to kind of test the waters on that stuff.
I think what sets you apart too is your understanding, because everyone can give commentary of what they see, but it's really your understanding of the court system that really makes you stand out. Is that something you've learned over time, or did you just take a couple weeks and say, I'm just going to sit back and learn every single piece of this process?
Yeah, it definitely was something over time. I can credit it back to the Spokesman Review. I remember one of the first trials that I covered, it was a murder case. And during a break, was sitting outside in the bench area, and the lead detective on the case, who I'd known for a while, he'd covered other cases that I covered. He came down and he actually sat right next to me, and he was being kind of cop-like. And he was like, Meghann, admit it, you are loving this right now. He's like, somebody would offer you a trip around the world and you wouldn't take it because you don't want to miss this trial. And I was like, yeah. Yeah, I just kind of laughed. I was like, yeah, you're exactly right, Kip. I mean, he just called it. Like I think they were all, I had covered the case for a while, but they were like, wow, Meghann has watched every minute of this trial. And I was just like so interested in everything the attorneys were doing and just like how it was being presented to the jury. And that was, I don't want to call it a run-of-the-mill murder case, but it wasn't exactly the kind of white-collar criminal cases that I covered at the LA Daily Journal. So when I went to the LA Daily Journal, that's, a newspaper for lawyers. They wouldn't cover Superior Court celebrity cases, but they would cover a really big white-collar criminal trial if it involves like the Skadden Arps white-collar defense team. So that experience with the Daily Journal is really when I learned how to watch trials and like how to really watch lawyers. Like just go to the courtroom and just watch a 2-month trial, like be there every day. And it was a really complex case. So I was able to kind of get into the strategy of the defense and why they were asking certain witnesses this and that. So that's kind of what got me hooked on it for sure.
What is, and this is a broad question, but in your opinion, from the people who don't go to a 2-month trial and are just kind of watching the highlights, what is the biggest misconception of the public regarding the court system?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions, and especially from journalists, is that the most important stuff and that the trial is all about opening and closing arguments, and that some of these witnesses are boring witnesses who don't really matter. I've read coverage of, I saw a reporter once on Twitter say, nothing happened at the trial this morning. It was all just run of the mill testimony. I'm like, okay, so who testified and what did they say? I mean, I'm like, I'm not so sure about that, but I think people just think that trials are so boring because, there aren't like fires and explosions going off on screens in front of you or something, but you actually have to listen to what people are saying and kind of like get into the human dynamics of it. But I just don't think trials are boring at all. And I think, and I think the public does, but I think it just kind of depends on how you're watching them and what you're looking for.
My dad, and this is going to be another one of those broad questions. My dad, the first time I was called for jury duty, I was thinking in my head, I was like, okay, how am I going to get out of this? He says, no, never try to get out of it, because that's the problem. People who are educated, they try to get out of jury duty. And we have these juries that aren't necessarily, don't have the background, diverse background, education, or ability to be objective. Do you think that people should really appreciate jury duty because it helps our legal system? Or is it one of those things where, like you said, they just think it's boring, so they want to get out of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people should love jury duty. I mean, I'd be excited to get called for jury duty. I actually finally got a summons in Orange County a few months ago, but didn't even end up having to go in. But I've never been selected for it. And but one thing I can sympathize with is the waste of time that you see. And one advantage I have from covering all these cases is going into LA Superior Court. I had a background of covering federal courts in Orange County with judges like Judge Cormac Carney and Judge David O. Carter. Like, they're very aware of the jury's time, and they don't like to see attorneys wasting the jury's time. Like, the attorneys are supposed to do everything outside of the jury's presence, so when the jury is there, it's the trial. Whereas like the Tory Lanez case, LA Superior Court, that was the first thing I noticed, was how much the jurors' time was getting wasted. And I'm like, this is such a bad perception for people, just for people who have to go to jury duty and then just have to sit out in the hallway and get their time wasted all day. Like, I mean, some people were saying that sometimes jurors will go to court and only actually get like 3 hours of testimony time in a day. So it's a really bad perception and like just a bad look for the court system. And I feel like covering all these different cases and seeing that, I kind of can bring that perspective to things.
So when the Tory Lanez case finally went to trial, I remember when it actually happened, and it was it glass? It was he said, she said. We didn't know what was actually going to happen. And then when they finally brought charges against him, was that the moment where you said, yes, I'm going to cover this, or did it take a little bit of time?
It was actually just being at the courthouse, covering the Harvey Weinstein case and the Danny Masterson case, and then just kind of talking with some other reporters. We'd all gotten the notice from LA Superior Court that the Tory Lanez case was coming up, and just kind of talking to them about, what is this case? And Nancy from Rolling Stone had been covering it, so she knew it really well. But there were some other reporters who we were just kind of like, should we cover this? Is this a big thing? I mean, I'd never heard of him before. I'd heard of her before, Meghann Thee Stallion. And actually, I had a tweet a couple days before the trial started. I tweeted that I was going to be covering the trial, and I was looking forward to it because Nancy from Rolling Stone and I had covered Cardi B's trial in Orange County a couple months ago. So I said, how many reporters get to say that they have covered testimony from the two women responsible for the WAP song in two unrelated trials within 3 months of each other? And now, like, looking back, I'm like, oh, I was so young and naive when I tweeted that. Like, all the vitriol on that case and all the just online, right now, if I had to do it over again, I might not have tweeted that, just because it kind of like just opens you up for all this online criticism. And to at Nancy like that, it kind of opened her up for that. But it's not like we got any flack, and being worried about that too, I also think is like, don't fall into those people. Don't let anonymous online critics like dictate how you cover things or how you write about things. But I just remember seeing that tweet a while back and being like, oh wow, that was just before I knew anything about this case. I had no idea what we were in for.
Yeah, when the trial first started, I was on a different podcast, and that was the first thing they asked me. They were like, what are your thoughts about it? And my immediate thought, and I think it's probably something that I've walked back a little bit, but at the time, I think this kind of leads to your point of, I just didn't care because this is celebrities doing whatever they do, and I was kind of disconnected from it. But I remember saying, like, I don't care because she's changed her story so many times. And I just don't, once you start doing that, that's a level of doubt for me. So I just kind of mentally tap out. But now looking back, and I was able to kind of read some of the things she said and talking about why she didn't say, I mean, yeah, there was a bunch of Black people and then cops pull up. Probably I wouldn't even have said that there was a gun. I wouldn't have said that because there's a risk factor when you're a Black person and the police are involved. But I was surprised how that didn't, or maybe it did and I just didn't see it. Did that, her changing her story several times, was that brought up? Did that impact the case in any way?
It definitely was brought up. Like, the prosecutors, Alex Bott brought it up really early on in his opening statement. Like, I remember, I mean, I just went in there not knowing what to expect and kind of having a background of covering complex trials, maybe kind of thinking that this wasn't going to be like the most interesting trial. But I thought Alex Bott's opening statement, where he got up before the jury, and the first thing he said to the jury, he stood in front of the jury and he said, "Dance, bitch." And I was like, okay, this is going to be a good trial. And I've told some people, I was like, Alex Bott is a young guy, and he already has a pretty killer story to tell his law school reunion class when he goes back, that he got to stand in front of a jury and say, "Dance, bitch." And it was a completely legitimate thing to say. Like, it was a really good way to start his opening. But he acknowledged early on that she had said that she stepped on glass, that she changed her story later on. Like, she called investigators a few days after that and said, "No, actually he shot me." But the whole idea that the story had been like constantly evolving, I don't think was presented. And my understanding was that it was just one change, that she told the cops she stepped on glass, and then a few days later she said, "No, Tory Lanez shot me."
But she also seemed to say that once she got to the hospital, that the doctor said that there was basically bullet fragments in her foot. So to me, and again, I'm not a medical professional, but that sounded like maybe she was shot at and then the shrapnel or whatever hit her foot. But did a bullet actually penetrate her foot? Because it didn't read like that from what I read.
It was bullet fragments in both feet. And if I remember, the surgeon's testimony, the assistant surgeon who testified, said that they removed fragments from both feet. One foot she underwent surgery on. It does get reported that she underwent surgery on both feet, but I was sitting there listening to the assistant surgeon testify, and he said while they removed fragments from both feet, only one foot was technically considered a surgery because they had to go all the way in, whereas the other foot was not quite as like inserted. But there's still fragments in her feet that are like there to this day.
So as the trial is progressing, I, like I said, felt that Tory did several things to, pun intended, I guess, shoot himself in the foot. Did you feel the same way as well? Did you feel like he kind of jeopardized his case a little bit?
Well, I always felt like it was a tough case for him to win, in that his defense didn't seem to come across very well. His defense being that Kelsey is the one who shot her, and it seemed to play into what the prosecutors were kind of trying to present, which was the misogynistic aspect of it, that this was, a domestic violence case, a family violence case against a woman, and that the perpetrator was now blaming the woman's best friend for it, and claiming that he was such a playboy that he upset the women were so jealous of him that they started fighting. It just seemed like, I've said that it seemed like the kind of defense that played well in the comments on the Shade Room Instagram page, but when you get into the actual courtroom and see the jury, you realize that's not going to. It might not play very well with them. I remember when I was at the Spokesman Review, an editor once told me that he told me that he thought a lot of plea deals were struck after the jury was seated, because he said, the defendant goes in there and they think, jury of my peers. And then they realize that the jury is actually a bunch of people who can fill out forms correctly, show up at a place on time, and not say the F word in every other sentence. And then they realize that, no, this actually isn't a jury of your peers. Mm-hmm. And they take a plea deal. After covering the court system for a number of years, I think he's wrong in that I don't think a lot of defendants actually just like leap up after a jury is seated and say, "Hey, I want to take a plea deal." But his point about the jury stands, in that, yeah, everybody thinks, "Oh, a jury of my peers." And when you actually see the jury, it's like, no, I don't think these people would ever be like hanging out with the criminal defendant anywhere, So right. It just wasn't the idea that defense would have worked and gotten him a full acquittal. I mean, maybe a hung jury, maybe, but I always just assumed he was going to be convicted.
And that's based on the way that his defense just kind of played out.
Yeah. They had they had her testimony, Meghann's testimony. They had Kelsey's testimony, which she recanted on the stand. But all the people who acted like Kelsey recanting on the stand was like such a big crisis for the prosecution. I mean, it actually happens all the time. And then they had her previous statements, her recorded statements, where she gave all the details on that. And Tory's lawyer being a little bit inexperienced, really was hammering Kelsey about that recording, kind of trying to discredit it, but he went about it in the wrong way and actually opened the door for the prosecutors to turn around and play the entire recording uninterrupted. Which at the time I remember thinking, and I actually messaged a lawyer who did that insider trading case I covered about that exact scenario and said, look what Tory Lanez' lawyers did in his cross-examination of Kelsey. He hammered this woman so much about prosecutors supposedly pressuring her in a recorded interview that he opened the door for prosecutors to go and play the entire recorded interview. And he was like, wow, that exemplifies how careful defense attorneys need to be in their cross-examinations. He's like, especially in cross-examinations, you need to be really careful about every single thing you ask, because if you go about it the wrong way, you could end up opening the door for stuff that you would never want in a million years. And that's exactly what George McDesian did with that Kelsey tape too. I mean, it was just kind of reckless, like rookie defense lawyering. As a legal affairs journalist, I found myself kind of happy in the Tory Lanez trial, because it was like, there's so many different levels of lawyering that you can see here, and having the ability to draw back to, what would the Skadden Arps white collar team do in the 2-month insider trading trial? How would they have approached that cross-examination? It would have been a little bit different.
It's interesting to me because, hearing you talk about his defense attorney and them being kind of inexperienced and kind of a rookie in the game and making this mistake. Tory Lanez, I met him, I want to say just a little while after the shooting happened. And I met him at Unite the People, where he had given $50,000. It's a nonprofit organization in Long Beach that really makes sure that people who couldn't afford a good defense, because it kind of recognizes that if you don't have a good defense, if you can't pay for that financially, then that increases your chance for an over sentencing or wrongful sentencing or something like that. So he had donated that money to that organization with the understanding that people need a good defense attorney. And then do you think that maybe he could have chosen a better defense team? Because it didn't seem like this defense team was experienced enough. And it's interesting to me because he knows that, like, he's donated money to nonprofits so he understands how important a good defense team is, but it didn't seem like he fronted that money to make sure he got a good defense team.
Yeah. And I also think, I mean, public defenders get an unfair bad rap when some of the public defenders that I've seen do trials in, LA Superior Court and then the Central District of California, they're great attorneys, and a lot of defense attorneys who they'd love to be able to get hired by the public defender's office, but their written advocacy wouldn't get them anywhere on that. So I feel like there's kind of and that leads to groups like Unite the People being able to kind of present themselves out as, oh, we're better than the public defenders. Because I think a lot of people who in California who are eligible for resentencing, I think some of these people can get public defenders to help them navigate the resentencing laws, but it's being presented, the whole public pretender argument is presented that, to get real representation, you need to go shell out a few $1,000s to this organization over there. Whereas they could actually probably get representation for free from experienced attorneys who have more experience. So, sorry, what was your question? I don't know if I...
No, that's a great answer, because that kind of plays into it, because I just didn't know, like with Tory Lanez, he obviously has the means to get a great defense team, but I don't feel like he did that in this situation.
Yeah, he had. I think his choice in the very beginning was kind of the best he could do. Shan Holly, and she's the celebrity attorney, but she also has trial experience. She did Danny Masterson's case, and when you read through her correspondence with him, that was one extraordinary thing that happened in the Tory Lanez case. Was his new lawyers post-conviction actually had him waive attorney-client privilege over some correspondence with Shan Holly. So they were all released publicly. And the email shows that a couple weeks before trial, she told him that she didn't think that the Kelsey strategy, aka blaming Kelsey for shooting Meghann, was a viable defense, and that if he wanted to pursue that, he should talk to George McDesian about it. So that's how he ended up parting ways with Shan Holly. And the argument in his motion for new trial was that Shan Holly was somehow conflicted on that because prosecutors had accused her of being involved in a bribery involving Kelsey, that she just didn't want to bring Kelsey up on the stand to question her about that. But that didn't really end up coming out much in the case. But what really came out was just this email where Shan Holly tells Tory she doesn't think blaming Kelsey is a viable defense. And just given all of Shan's experience and what she knows about jury trials, I think she just knew that it was a losing defense. And so, but Tory is his own client or is his own man. And it was the biggest example to me of how in the end, there's only so much a lawyer can do. Like the lawyer can't just control the whole case, and the lawyer serves the client. And if the client is insistent that he wants this to be the defense, no matter how much the experienced lawyer who's done all these trials tells him that that's not a good idea, if he insists on doing it, I mean, what can she do? I mean, she basically just said she did help George like get abreast on the issue. And God, there was a line, the email Shan Holly sent Tory started with per our conversation on Saturday or something like that. I'm like, oh man, to be a fly on the wall for her conversation on Saturday with Tory. I'm like, I wonder how that went.
Tory Lanez, he talked a little too much. I know he was he violated a restraining order. He talked about DNA that he shouldn't have talked about publicly because that was a court order. And then did he come after you as well? Did he say something negative about you directly?
He did. It was in his when his motion for bail got rejected, and there was so much commotion going on in the courtroom. He had turned around and he was talking like to the people in the gallery. I mean, it looked like he was looking at me, but when you're standing around 10 other people, I mean, who knows who he's looking at? Like I couldn't hear him, but when I went out to the hallway and I saw on Twitter, it was one of his loyal fans was celebrating that, oh, he called Meghann a googly-eyed bitch. And I'm like, oh, is that what that was about? And when I first saw it, I believed it, because I'm like, it would be a pretty weird thing for them to just make up. And that is exactly something that he would say. I mean, they're all so immature. And I mean, they're like celebrating this. He would like think that was like a cool, like winning move for him to do. But I was like, I mean, this is just one of his fans on Twitter. I was like, I'd probably get a little more confirmation than just that. But I emailed the DA's office and they said, oh yeah, Alex bought. I think they were a little worried that I was going to be like upset about it or something. But they're like, yeah, they said a few deputies definitely heard it. And it's unclear whether he actually addressed me by name, but it was definitely like googly-eyed bitch. And I was like, oh, all right. So I wonder if I should like trademark that and like make t-shirts or something. I don't know. I'm just like, he's kind of just, I don't know. It's like, if Hereford sees that, and Judge Hereford, who granted his bail or who rejected his bail request, I mean, is he going to then think, oh, I should have given this guy bail. He's obviously so mature and could have handled this. Because honestly, I mean, I knew there was absolutely no way he was going to get bail. Like, what a joke. I mean, why are they even asking? But I did kind of think to myself, I'm like, if for some reason he does get bail, I really do need to like watch my back. I was like, I will feel considerably less safe if Tory Lanez is out on bail.
Really?
Well, I mean, I've always kind of, I mean, the threats and stuff online and stuff, it's like, oh, just ignore it, But I mean, I was just thinking, it was like, really? I mean, first of all, there's no way he's going to get bail. But if he actually gets bail, I think I would be like a person on his list to like have words with. I mean, I don't know. I'm overall pretty trusting, and I don't think people are just going to show up at my apartment and do something. But also, like, don't be too trusting about things. And, I mean, yeah, like I said, I was like, wow, I will be much less safe if he gets out on bail.
So does his demeanor just strike you as he could come unhinged easily?
No, I mean, he always seemed kind of relaxed and in court. And I also have to see, like, does he really think I'm the biggest problem here? I mean, the idea that I'm the one who got him convicted, it's like, what people really don't seem to understand, especially his fans, this case was over on December 23rd. It wasn't over when his motion for new bail was rejected, or a motion for new trial. none of that stuff ever had a chance of happening. The second the jury convicted him and he was remanded, it was done. And I remember a couple of days before that happened, because I just don't think people were so obsessed with the case, but they didn't seem to realize the magnitude of what was happening. I mean, I was just watching the trial. I was like, this guy is so sunk. He is going to be convicted. I mean, maybe there'll be like one juror who doesn't want to do it and there'll be a hung jury or something. But I'm like, he's going to get convicted. And the way this trial is going, he's going to get remanded like 2 days before Christmas. So I even had a tweet. I wasn't familiar with the Tory Lanez catalog, but I started listening to it during the trial, and I heard his song Gratata, where he's like practically, I mean, he's like taunting us. He's like, I know y'all hoes want me in jail, but I'm going to keep fronting. I'm like, this is hilarious. I was like, this guy is going to get convicted within a couple of days and be in jail, and he's not going to get out for like at least a few years, because this is a first degree assault charge. So I tweeted, I said, you know, Tory Lanez raps about this predicament in Gratata, and quoted that and just said, yeah, he's going to get convicted, and he's going to be, the judge is going to be under serious pressure to remand him on the spot. And I said it was going to happen 2 days before Christmas, and it turns out I was completely wrong. It was 2 days before.
2 days before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he had an opportunity to take a 4-year plea. How did that come about? And did you think he was going to reject that?
You know, I've heard, Vlad, DJ Vlad reported that it was 4 years. I heard from somebody else that it was 3 years.
Oh, okay.
Then I also heard from Alex Bott that he's 99% sure they would not offer him a plea. So I'm not really sure who to believe, but I think the 3 to 4 sounds, you know, accurate. And it just seemed like he was just so overly confident. And it's something that I like to explore in a book too, because it shows the huge disconnect between the actual court case and like popular opinion, that he wasn't frankly scared shitless going into that trial, like that he could have his entire life ruined and not see his son grow up. I mean, it's like, this is serious, dude. You're not going to get acquitted of this. I mean, and just the bravado that they showed. I mean, it says something about, you know, civics education, but then I also think it says something about journalism and the way journalists cover courts, and the fact that there's such a disconnect between popular opinion and what actually happens in the courtroom, and that somebody who has covered courts and seen a lot of trials can just know that this guy is sunk and his life is, I mean, his life is pretty much over, but nobody else around him really seems to understand that. And his own lawyer is like, where's my NG, guys? Like, not guilty. Like, he was saying that in the hallway when the jury was deliberating. And I'm like, I mean, I told somebody else, it's like any lawyer who like hears him talk like that would just roll their eyes and be like, that guy's a moron. And maybe he's just saying that to like front to Tory's fans, but it also seems kind of irresponsible to get those people all gassed up and think that there's a chance that he's going to get acquitted. Because to me, the craziest part of the Tory Lanez case was what happened in like the 10 months after that. Because like I said, the case was over on December 23rd when he was convicted. But his fans were just so jacked up. Like, that's when all the harassment of me started, is in the 10 months during his motion for new trial. Like, they seemed to honestly think that he might get a new trial. And some of them really seemed to think that if they bothered me enough and if I stopped writing stories about it, it would like make the judge more likely to grant his motion for new trial. I mean, it was crazy.
I talked to his appeals attorney last week, and that was one of the questions. Well, one of my main questions for them, and just to get your opinion on conjecture on this one, is it's Unite the People attorneys. So for me, when your whole premise of your nonprofit is to provide legal counsel to people who can't afford it, it's just confusing to me why they would take on Tory's appeal. Do you have any thoughts as to why that is?
Well, and I think it's just because he's like such a loyal supporter of Unite the People, that he's been a board member, that he's donated them money. But yeah, from Tory's standpoint, you'd think that if he's spent so much money on his legal team and he's really pushing the I'm innocent and I need to be released, you'd think he would have saved a little bit money to pay some appellate attorneys. Because I mean, Crystal Morgan and the people at Unite the People, I think that they are the kind of people who went into law like for the right reasons. I mean, because especially being from the Daily Journal, it's completely relevant where somebody went to law school. That's what everybody talks about. Like if you're profiling somebody, you would write where they went to law school and what their clerkships were. But the fact that Crystal Morgan got her law degree online, I think if you just like said that to people, people like would think that there was a reason to like laugh at her or something like that. But I'm like really hesitant to kind of play into that, because the important thing is that she passed the California State Bar. And I think when we get into that like kind of snobism involving law schools, it's like, you know, somebody who got a law degree online and then was able to pass the California State Bar is in a really good position to go and do like good legal work for groups like Unite the People, because they don't have like all this law school debt. You know, just because somebody got their law degree online doesn't mean they can't go and be a good lawyer. But then on the other hand, for an appellate case like this, and with all the money that Tory Lanez spent on Jose Baez and Matthew Barhoma, it's like, really? This is your appellate counsel? Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't want to criticize them or like get into this like kind of snobby assessment of them that, oh, they can't be good lawyers because they got their law degrees online, but they just don't seem to have. I mean, to go from Jose Baez to this, when it seemed like the appeal is something that you would want to focus on a little bit more. It just seemed like where are his priorities kind of thing. Like if Jose Baez had been the trial attorney, there would have been a different, you know, could have been a different story, because he just kind of has a different style of trial attorney, and he's so experienced on that. It would have been different, but he's not. I mean, he's not a California law guy, so bringing him in post conviction was. I just don't think there was a lot that Jose Baez could do for him, you know.
Mm-hmm. So, in your opinion, best case scenario for Tory in this appeals case?
Best case scenario is there is some kind of appealable issue for him, and he gets it remanded to the trial court for either a new trial or sentencing or something. Realistically, I just don't think that there's much of a chance of that happening. He doesn't seem to have very big appealable issues, because those would be brought out in the motion for new trial. And the motion for new trial, the issues that were raised there wasn't anything that ever caught Judge Hereford's attention. And I think Crystal and Unite the People are excited about a couple of proposed laws that, if they pass, they think could lead to them petitioning for Lanez to be resentencing. But I think when you look into all that goes on there, even if those laws do pass and it is found that they could apply to Lanez's case, it's still going to be a decision that Judge Hereford makes. So I do think that there's a lot of, there's a little overemphasis on some things. And I think some people might be getting their hopes up for something that might not have a greater chance of happening. And then I've also, Unite the People, when I was listening to Caesar talk on a show the other day or on his Instagram live, he was talking about how ready they are for this and how they already have, habeas petitions, on file and that kind of thing. And it seems like you might not want to rush something like this, like having, on file habeas petitions that you can just file for any inmate who comes forward. Like you might want to tailor the case a little more specifically to him. So, I really think we're in for a long wait here. The court will probably reject his motion for bail or writ petition for bail within the coming weeks. But after that, we're just not going to hear anything for a while. For you personally, that you cover these celebrity trials, is there anything that's ever happened in your coverage that you've lost sleep over at night, that it just kind of struck you in a way that you were like, oh man, it's going to stick with me for a while? Oh gosh. Well, you always are just aware of how much this affects people and how you're writing about people's really personal experiences and their personal lives. So, any kind of little error, typo or something. You just want everything to be totally clean and clear. And also, I do think about Meghann a lot. And one thing I'm always aware of is how much the coverage is just all about Tory. Even his sentencing was just all about him. It's just, the TMZ coverage, the way they puff him up, and it's just, and you just kind of lose sight of her in all this. And I've always just kind of wondered, it's like, I wonder if my coverage is like actually helping her. I think overall, like I've been able to really amplify like the truth for her, but it just comes down to, it's like, how many times are we going to write about this case, especially after he's been sentenced and everything? I mean, people are like wanting me to bring up the transcripts from her testimony or something. It's like, people just need to move on from this. So that's one thing that kind of keeps me like, that worries me the most about the Lanez coverage, is making sure that it's not just like you're not just catering into the harassment of her.
Thank you so much, Meghann, for taking the time. This has been fantastic. I can't wait to keep following your coverage. And maybe, well, I don't know if I should look forward to that, but maybe if we need you again, we can bring you back on the show. I don't want it to be that I'm just hoping for somebody to be in a legal situation where I have to call on Meghann, but if it happens, I will reach out. Once again, thank you so much to Meghann Cuniff for joining. She is so good at what she does that I am not surprised that she has earned the nickname Meghann the Reporter. If you want to follow all the cases that she's covering, you can do that by going to her website, legalaffairsandtrials.com, or you can follow her on Instagram. Both of those will be linked in the description. Once again, thank you guys so much for joining us. And remember, if you have to speak a word, make it a good one. We'll see you next time.